#2. If you would like to speak during the questions and comments portion of this presentation, please wait until your name is called. Next slide, please. You may also use our Q&A feature to send written comments or questions. And this concludes the housekeeping items. Next slide, please. All right. For today's public meeting, we have prepared the following agenda. We'll start by discussing the background of the Carl Moyer Incentive Program, including background for the marine vessels category in Chapter 7. Today, we are looking for stakeholder feedback on our proposed revisions to the marine chapter and would appreciate all your comments and your feedback. We want to hear what you guys think about what we're working on, and we want to help you guys. We're going to be going over the broad eligibility requirements for Moyer as well, and the chapter updates will be the bulk of the presentation, followed by next steps and timeline with time for questions and answers, wrapping up this public meeting. Next slide, please. A PDF of this presentation is posted. On this slide, you'll be able to find the proposed updated Chapter 7. The presentation link and all material for this meeting will be posted in the Carl Moyer Meetings and Workshops webpage. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to be going over the background of the Carl Moyer Program. The Moyer Program is a partnership between CARB and local air districts. The program is district implemented, and the districts can make funding decisions based on local priorities and may choose more stringent criteria than those in overall statewide program guidelines. Collaboration with the districts is key to the program's success. So we are really trying to work with all the districts and get their input and all their feedback so that we can make this program work as best as possible. The Moyer Program funds cleaner than required engines, equipment, and emission reduction technologies. A key element of the program is ensuring that projects are cost effective and that emission reductions are credible to a state implementation plan, also known as a SIP. In order for these projects to be SIP credible, the Moyer project emission reductions must be permanent, surplus, quantifiable, and enforceable. In short, emission reductions must be earlier than required by any regulation or must reduce emissions beyond what's required by the applicable regulations. We refer to this as surplus reductions. Next slide, please. The Commercial Harbor Craft Amendments, also known as the CHC Amendments, were adopted by the CARB Board on March 24th, 2022. They were approved by the Office of Administrative Law on December 30th, 2022, and went into effect on January 1st of this year. The regulatory amendments included turning over uncontrolled Tier 1 and Tier 2 engines to Tier 3 or Tier 4 plus DPF. It also expanded the vessel categories subject to in-use requirements. They also now include zero-emission and hybrid requirements for selected vessel categories. Our goal with this update to the chapter is to clarify funding opportunities for the newly regulated vessel types. We also added a new project type and updated the chapter to account for the CHC amendments. Next slide, please. The Carl Moyer fundamental eligibility requirements include all baseline engines being replaced must be scrapped. If the entire vessel is being replaced in a vessel replacement project, then the entire baseline vessel needs to be scrapped to ensure it is permanently taken out of service. Funded replacement engines must be installed prior to the compliance date. Emission reductions that occur prior to or in the absence of regulatory requirements are considered surplus and eligible for funding. Grant amounts are based on engine hours or fuel consumption. This is used to calculate the emission reductions. Vessel owners must submit documentation to districts as part of the funding application process to demonstrate compliance with the regulation. This may include annual reporting or approved regulatory compliance extensions. Next slide, please. Here I am briefly going over some of the proposed updates for this chapter, and I'll be diving in deeper in the next few slides. We will be going over clarifying criteria for vessel types that are now subject to the amended regulation. I'll also be clarifying the maximum funding percentages by project type and emission standards. the funding opportunities for vessels with alternative compliance dates, and define vessel replacement project criteria, including zero-emission and zero-emission capable hybrid vessels. Lastly, we are proposing a change to the minimum project life from 3 years to 1 year. These changes are intended to continue funding opportunities in the near term. However, there are also additional plans to update the Moyer program next year to address bigger changes that may be needed in this chapter, along with other chapters in the guidelines. Next slide, please. We are expanding the funding opportunities to include the newly regulated vessel types, in addition to the vessel types previously eligible for funding. So the newly regulated vessels that are now eligible for funding, along with everyone else who was already eligible for funding, includes commercial passenger fishing vessels, also known as CPFVs, commercial fishing vessels, all tank barges, pilot vessels, workboats, and research vessels. Next slide, please. We have also updated some of the maximum funding percentages based on vessel type and tier of the replacement engine or project type. These percentages for all project types can be found in Table 7-2 of the proposed chapter. Project types eligible for the maximum of 85% of allowable project cost are vessels who are repowering to Tier 4 engines, CARB verified retrofits or diesel particulate filters, also known as DPFs, vessel replacement projects. I'll be going over the criteria for this project type in the next slide. Commercial fishing vessels repowering their engine with Tier 3 engines, and also zero-emission or zero-emission capable hybrid repowers are also eligible for up to 85%. Lastly, this is for stakeholders. If you guys have any input on cost information for any project types listed on Table 7-2, and you guys are willing to share that information with Moyer staff, please do so. This will help us finalize those proposed maximum funding amounts. Next slide, please. Okay, vessel replacement projects. This is a new project type. This is our initial proposal, and the criteria seen on this slide includes references to requirements in the amended regulation for vessel replacements, and they include situations in which the vessel repower would compromise the structural integrity of the vessel. Extensive vessel modifications are required by the repower, so that would reduce the passenger capacity by 25% or more, or if the repower costs exceed the cost for vessel replacements. If a repower is feasible, but a vessel owner still wishes to replace the vessel, the maximum funding amount will be based on the lower cost of the two options, whether that be repower or the replacement. All vessel replacement projects will be evaluated by staff on a case-by-case basis. Please note that we would like input from stakeholders on this issue. However, we will refer to regulation criteria for vessel replacements. Next slide, please. We also updated the zero-emission and zero-emission capable hybrid vessel section of the guidelines. Our updated criteria to be eligible for funding include a CARB-approved zero-emission and advanced technology application, also known as a ZEOT application. These applications for zero-emission and zero-emission capable hybrid projects are evaluated by regulatory staff. The intent of requesting the approved ZEOT application is to eliminate the need for Moyer staff to look over the technology. So it'll get rid of the CBC approval requirement on the technology itself. Current guidelines include a 5-year max project life and warranty for these types of projects. At this time, we're not proposing a change, but we'll be evaluating this for our planned update of 2024. Lastly, if this project is part of an alternative control of emissions program, also known as an ACE program, please include the documentation. Next slide, please. Lastly, we did update the minimum project life. This change is a reduction in minimum project life from 3 years to 1 year to ensure opportunities for funding are available with approaching compliance deadlines and to account for approved regulatory compliance extensions. All projects must be installed and in operation 1 full year minimum prior to compliance deadline and to ensure that the project is surplus to regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. Next steps and timeline. Please remember that we will be accepting public comments until August 12, 2023 via email. My email will be on the last slide for everyone who's interested in providing feedback or suggestions on the proposed Chapter 7 updates. Our goal is to have the chapter finalized and approved approximately 2 weeks after the comment period closes. But please sign up for Moyer Gov Delivery to receive notifications of program updates, including a notice with a link to the final chapter once it's approved. Next slide, please. Now we can answer your questions on Carl Moyer Guideline Marine Chapter updates. For specific questions about application processes and project selection, please contact your local air district. If you would like to comment or ask a question, please use the Q&A feature or raise your hand. Please remember to state your name, your affiliation, and if needed, reference specific slides or page numbers in the draft proposed chapter when making comments or asking questions. Derek, do we have any raised hands at this time?
Yeah, we have 2.
All right.
I'm going to allow Ray Carpenter to speak. When Ray, go ahead and state your name and affiliation, please. Ray, you should be able to speak now. Okay. Oh, Ray?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead. Please state your name and affiliation, please, for the record.
Right. I'm Ray Carpenter. I'm president of Arley State. We've been in business in San Diego with small boats for 85 years and are being majorly impacted on this. That's another story, but specific to the questions, I'm going to turn the question over to Andrew Butts. He's our chief mechanic and responsible for moving ahead with all of our repowers, of which we've done 27. Go ahead, Andrew.
This is Andrew Butts, Arley State. Under the ACE program, would we be allowed to repower a vessel that's in the ACE program now? Because in the past, it's been if you're in an ACE, you can't use Carl Moyer to repower.
Thank you, Ray. And what was your name again?
Andrew.
Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, for your question. Let me get back to you to confirm. This is for the vessel that you're trying to repower is in an ACE program.
Then, yes, we're talking about and putting it in an ACE program to extend the compliance date, because now you have a 1-year window of compliance in order to be eligible for Carl Moyer. In the past, it's been 3 years. We've been denied 4 years in a row now with this vessel. Want to put it in an ACE program and see if we can't reapply for Carl Moyer.
Okay, so let me do this. Let me get your contact information and I will get back to you so that I could look into that. I want to make sure I get you the correct information. So your vessel, you're considering putting it in an ACE program and you want to see if we can do Moyer funding for a vessel that is already in the ACE program.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so let me get back to you. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. I will look into this and get back to you as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now we have about 4 more people with their hands up. I don't know how many you want to take until we switch over to Q&A, but the next one is Ken Frank. Ken, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead and unmute, and just remember to state your name and affiliation for the record, please.
Yes, hello, Ken Frankie. I'm president of the Sport Fishing Association of California. First of all, thank you. Great presentation, and I think that 1-year transition is going to get a whole lot of other boats out there and reduced emissions. Do you have a date that you've projected of where you would accept applications, or at least down at the different districts? At what point do you foresee that occurring?
Well, thank you for your question, Ken. once we approve the guidelines, the districts have the discretion to, as soon as they're active, we approved it, they can start funding projects based on the guidelines. So you really would have to contact your district and see when they're accepting applications. I would do it as soon as possible, just so that you don't miss their application period. But if you get that application in and the guidelines are approved, you can go through that 1 year minimum for the project life.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome. Next question, please, Derek.
Okay, next is Michael Hoffman. Michael, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead and state your name for the record, please. Your name and affiliation for the record, please. Sorry about that.
Yes, good morning. Name's Michael Hoffman of Cummins Sales and Service. Am I being heard?
Yes.
Okay, great. Marion, I also submitted this via questions and answers. So just one is all that's needed. But question is, 1 year projects will substantially decrease the cost effectiveness of a particular applicant. Is that being addressed by raising the cost per ton effective limits?
We are not raising, thank you for your question, Michael. We are not raising the cost effectiveness limit. If the project is still cost effective, even at 1 year project life, then this vessel would be eligible for Carl Moyer funding. So you would have to work with your district, and based on the hours of, that this vessel is functioning, and at 1 year project life, if it's still cost effective, then the vessel would be eligible for funding. But we are not raising the limit right now.
Okay, and could you refresh my memory? What is the limit at this time?
What kind of, do you have a regular vessel, or are you trying to go?
Well, the commercial passenger fishing vessels kind of tend to be the primary target. So let's say that one.
34,000 is the cost effectiveness limit for those.
Okay.
And if you were to go zero emission, then that would raise that up to 522,000.
Perfect. Thank you, Marion.
You're welcome. Derek, do we have any more raised hands at this time?
Yes, we have 4 more raised hands.
Okay, let's go ahead and do one more, then we can switch over to the Q&A and then come back over to raised hands.
Sounds good. Stacy Callis, I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead and state your name and affiliation for the record, please.
Hi, everyone. This is Stacy Callis with Clean Air Grant Associates. We provide regulatory compliance assistance and grant funding assistance to a variety of operators within California. I actually have a few questions, so please cut me off if I'm asking too many. The first, just wanted to tag on one of the previous questions about if a vessel is going to participate in ACE, if they can also receive Carl Moyer funding. I have the same question, but for vessels that are enrolled in ZEET under the regulation, the ZEET credits, if they would also be able to apply for grant funding or be engaged in Carl Moyer funds.
Okay, so you're saying you have vessels currently in ACE program and in ZEOT, correct?
Yeah, hypothetical. Just curious if when you go, to evaluate if ACE participants can engage in Carl Moyer, if you could also look at ZEET participants as well.
Okay, I will look into that, and thank you, Stacy, for your question. We do have your contact information, so I'll be able to get back to you on. You want to know ACE and ZEOT, correct?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. And what was?
I do have a few more, but do you want me to wait for another?
Go ahead.
Okay, perfect.
So, real quick, Stacy, just to clarify and to be clear, is Moyer cannot pay for compliance, but we can pay for early and extra. So if the ACE program, and I have to, Miriam will look into it further, but if your situation is where you're choosing that as an alternative compliance pathway, then that might be a little bit different. You need to make sure, we still have to be early and extra, and you have to meet the cost effectiveness limit. So it's a situational specific.
Yeah. And I think too, it'll be dependent on the vessel category. So like,
Yes.
so let's say a vessel who is wanting to do ZEET and gain a 3-year ZEET credit under the regulation, but they're not required to do so. They're just doing it voluntarily.
Mhm.
And they also still be involved in Moyer. What about if they are required to do it? So, you know,
Yeah.
just define,
Yes.
just defining that based on vessel category would be super helpful. And then for the CARB, so for the CARB verified ZEET technology, I'm assuming that this is kind of something that's going to be handled as the projects roll in. So CARB regulatory staff or engineering staff will evaluate the project and the proposed system. And will there be a verification that is spawned out of that process, or are they expecting projects to come in that are already verified? Because it's my understanding that there aren't too many verified marine ZEET systems at this time.
Okay, so that question does sound a little bit more regulatory to me. So I would recommend that you contact the regulatory staff at harborcraft@arb.gov, because I don't want to give any misinformation there.
Okay, that sounds good. It sounds like something that will have to be talked about between CARB, Moyer, and regulatory staff as it comes up.
Okay.
Yeah, and Stacey, we want to make sure that we're consistent with the rule. If there is like a call in the regulation for any kind of like approval, so like it doesn't necessarily rule it out per se, but we want to be consistent with the reg. So that's kind of the bottom line. So if there is, especially if there's a credit program involved, I don't want to speak for the reg staff or the rule at all, but we'll follow up with them and get back to you on this question. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just to let you know, Stacey, it's really tough with the hypotheticals because there's just so many different instances that we can't quite fully evaluate. And so it does help if there's real life examples that you can point to, just sharing, so that when you engage with the regulatory staff, you have a point of reference. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
And I do want to
and-
confirm their email is harborcraft@arb.ca.gov. I believe I misspoke earlier. I forgot the CA. So harborcraft@arb.ca.gov.
Okay. And then this question is in regards to the cost effectiveness limits at 34,000. And the question that the other individual had earlier about, you know, reducing the 1-year project life is great. However, when you actually run cost effectiveness calculations for a variety of projects, a 1-year project life, especially for the smaller vessels like the commercial fishing and the commercial passenger fishing vessel fleets and whatnot, they have a difficult time being cost effective at that 1-year benchmark. And I'm just curious, did CARB run those scenarios based on various types of vessels that are out there and operating? Or like was that evaluated by CARB when?
I was going to say, Stacey, what we did was we knew that there were approaching compliance deadlines, like very quickly aggressive compliance deadlines based on the regulation. So we were looking to provide some opportunities for funding by shortening the minimum project life from 3 down to 1. We recognize that these can be very expensive projects. And so we're sort of up against being able to provide any funding at all with a 1-year project life, because Moyer still has to live with the overall program. I don't want to say limitations, but the program requirements of providing surplus reductions while still recognizing that the regulation has some very aggressive compliance deadlines. So that's like trying to strike a balance. And you'll recall that in the presentation, we asked for that like cost information, because that will help us understand whether or not the 85% that we're offering for some project types, whether that's appropriate. We want to make sure that we get whatever information we can to help us with that. So if vessel owners or folks that have participated would share that information with us beyond sort of projects that we've done in the past, we would really appreciate that. I think that will help sort of put all this into perspective. So thank you for your comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I really do appreciate you guys digging in and looking at all of this and providing the opportunities that you have. And regarding operational and installed, I understand. So when you say that the project has to be operational and installed in order to, meet that 1 year deadline, that means it needs to be able to bounce back in the water. It's not just, engine bolted in. It has to be fully completed.
Yes, Stacy, that's correct. We are expecting that the vessel is up and running 1 year minimum prior to their regulatory compliance date.
Okay, and this is my last question. Do you think that districts will be able to apply these guidelines to contracted projects or projects that are in the evaluation process now, or is it something that they can only apply these new guidelines to the next funding cycle that they engage in?
So this would be based on the contract execution date that the district has with the applicant. Obviously, we can't, go back and change anything. These guidelines we're anticipating will be approved by the end of next month. We're hoping, fingers crossed. So if that's the case, projects that are going forward can use the approved guidelines. Does that answer your question?
So,
Yeah.
so Stacy, on your question there is, if a district amends an existing contract, they have to reevaluate it relative to all of the current requirements and guidelines, regulations and all. So that means surplus and all of these requirements would have to taken into consideration. Some would help that the contract, some may not. We don't really know, but what has to get reevaluated is the state of program at that moment that getting amended.
Right, and I will say,
Yeah.
to add on to that, on what Tess said, we also are working and engaging with districts right now, because we know that they've been currently over the past, earlier this year, they were accepting applications and evaluating them. And we are currently working with districts to see if we can approve case-by-case approvals for contracts while they're sort of in the interim. And so this has been kind of a juggling act, looking to update the guidelines so that we can move ahead and sort of proceed with these new requirements, in addition to accommodating sort of those applications that are in progress so that the districts can use them at the same time. It's like we're working with the districts on that process as well. Just wanted to address that.
Great, that's amazing, because I know it's going to be a lot more work for the local districts, but if they are interested in having that flexibility, it sounds like it's there. So we really appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Stacy. All right, let's do a few Q&A questions before we hop back to those raised hands. Holmes, do we have any written questions?
Yes, we do. Thank you. We've got Gregory Herner asked, public and private ferries were not listed as eligible. Are they not eligible for the 1 year?
They are eligible for thank you for your question, Gregory. They are eligible for that 1 year. The 1 year is for all vessel types, but you do have to make sure that it's still early and advanced to what the regulation requires. Did
Okay,
we
next.
have, go ahead.
Next, we have Michael Hoffman. 1 year projects will be less cost effective. Have the cost ton limits been increased? This question I feel like has been answered. If you've got another related question, feel free to type something in there, Michael. Gregory.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we did answer that question. He ended up raising his hand and we did talk to him. So thank you, Michael.
And Gregory Herner again, if a person applies for a project, but there are delays outside of the vessel owner's control, such as a supply chain delay that results in not meeting the 1 year, is there any consideration or does that person lose their grant?
I believe this is me, Tess, Rhonda, feel free to jump into this one. I do feel that we still have to follow the Moyer, statute, and we do have to still have that surplus in there. So I think that they would not be eligible if we lose that surplus there, but feel free to jump in, Tess.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's one of those hypotheticals you never really happen. I think it's worth a discussion if that's the situation, because if that's an issue that's outside of the purchaser's control, we've had to deal with that for other source categories, but not necessarily within that kind of crunch of 1 year surplus time. And so it's worth a discussion. So please, if that comes up, ask. We don't know either way that it means that you'll lose it or not lose it. We have to think about that further.
And I would suggest you contact our regulatory staff as well, since there are compliance extensions for things that are outside of the control of the applicant.
Yes.
Thank you, Gregory, for that question. Holmes, do we have any other Q&A questions?
Yes, we've got Frank City. Are excursion vessels and ferries eligible under Moyer for repower funding?
Yes, they are eligible for repowering, and thank you, Frank, for that question. But again, you have to follow what the regulatory requirements are. For ferries, I do believe that they will be going zero emission, so make sure that they are eligible. They just have to follow what the regulatory requirement is, and it has to be early and early to when it's the required.
Thank you, Marion. We've got Franker City. Second question, how much money will be allocated to each district, and what sets that criteria or number of dollars allocated to each district?
So each district, thank you for that question. Each district does not get a set amount. The amount that they get is based on their population and the pollution burden. So we cannot say right now, like, SJV is going to get this or.
So what I would say is that Moyer is a perpetually funded program. That allocation across air districts funding is set in statute, and it's based on a formula that Miriam had mentioned, which is pollution, population, and the pollution burden of NOx, PM, and that's calculated and updated based on data of that year, based on the dollars collected from that year before. So we could give you an idea, but we won't really know like a general percentage, but we don't know the exact dollar figure.
Okay.
Yeah, in addition to that, there isn't necessarily a specific set aside for marine vessels. Like each of the decisions on funding is based on the local priorities and local air districts and their needs in terms of funding specific categories of equipment, including marine vessels.
Okay, we'll run through a few more of these before we switch back over to raised hands. We've got Nilda Parado. Hello, are the Carl Moyer funding stackable?
Yes, they are stackable. We can co-fund. However, we have to meet the requirements of both programs. So that means that whatever you're co-funding with, you have to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of Moyer plus that program. Rhonda, do you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add, that is 100% correct. And that the other consideration is that current Moyer statute requires that Moyer take credit for the criteria pollutants when they're stacked. So that's why I say it might depend upon, there might be more work needed or sort of questions answered regarding which program you're stacking with. but the idea is that Moyer is taking credit for the criteria pollutants. Thank you.
All right, next we have Terry Wright. Can you make sure to send out answers to questions to all participants in addition to following up with individual inquirers? Thank you. I'm actually going to take a first stab at that and let you know that this is being recorded and will be posted and available for your viewing pleasure. But Marion, if you want to add to that.
Rhonda, is that something that we normally do?
So,
the answers. Oh, go ahead, Tess.
What I would say is that based on the responses that we get on the individual's questions, if there is a general programmatic guidance that can be clear and added to the based on that response, like specifically our ACE equipment in or out, we'll make a general statement related to that on the Carl Moyer Marine webpage itself in terms of those responses, because some of that specificity really isn't one to share with the whole group because it is vessel specific. So if it's, we'll definitely share all the programmatic insight that we learned from those. Yeah.
Okay, and we will take one more from Gregory Herner again before we switch over to hands raised. And I think this one is worth asking, even though it's a repeat subject, I think there is additional clarity that can come from this. Can you list the cost effectiveness for the other vessel classes or post the link to where that can be found?
Yeah, I can take this. So Gregory, the current cost effectiveness limit is found in our guidelines. And for all diesel projects, the cost effectiveness limit is $33,000 per ton for diesel to diesel or conventional projects. And then for marine vessels, there is for zero emission, there is an advanced technology off-road limit of $522,000 a ton. There are some other incremental different limits offered for some on-road truck projects, and then some specific ones for school buses. But in terms of for the marine category, those are the two cost effectiveness limit requirements that must be met for marine projects. Thanks for the question.
Hey, Derek, if you want to take over back with raised hands.
All right, looks like we have just one hand remaining from Michael Hoffman again. Michael, I'm going to allow you to speak. Go ahead and just restate your name and affiliation for the record, please.
Good morning, Michael Hoffman, again with Cummins Sales and Service. I think this question has been at least partially addressed by you guys on a question that Franker said he had regarding funding availability. But at the risk of being redundant, I do want to ask it again. I think there's going to be a high level of activity because of so many boats with very little time, compliance time left. So there's going to be a lot of hands in the pot. Has any thought been given to increasing funding, at least initially, in these next few years for the marine applications?
So thank you, Michael, for that question. Like we mentioned, it's based on statute. So the districts are getting the funding that they're getting, and they have the discretion to choose, how much of their funds they want to push towards marine. Of course, there are other funding opportunities outside of Moyer, but as far as Moyer is concerned, we have no direct control just to say hey, this year we're going to give more funds, just because it is based on statute. But the districts do have the discretion to choose how much of those funds will be going towards marine or towards off-road. It's based on their community priorities. Does that answer your question, Mike?
It answers my question, and it wasn't the answer I wanted to hear. It seems like in many, at least in years past, marine just kind of didn't get the nod, whereas industrial or agricultural guys would get first spot in line. I don't know where they set with their regulations, but I do know there's so many potential applicants out there that are really at time zero.
Yeah, there was additional funding that legislature had appropriated for marine. That's a different solicitation. That's not the Moyer program, but I actually don't know the status of that one. But
Nathan, is there a name that you could reference on that?
Yeah, yeah. Nathan Dean is the manager over that one. So Nathan Dean at arb.ca.gov. I don't know the status of that solicitation in particular.
Nathan Dean, you say?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Jarek, did we have any more raised hands?
We had one additional hand. Rick Lulucci, I'm going to allow you to speak. Go ahead and state your name and affiliation for the record, please. Rick, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak. There you go.
Sorry about that. I've been talking to myself for quite a while now. Hey, thank you for putting this together. I appreciate it. My name is Rick Iolucci. I am with Mainline Bunkering Company. On table 7.2, forgive my ignorance to this, but when I look at that, the project type would be a repower of a tugboat. And I look at the baseline technology stated, and it references EPA Tier 2. If this vessel is already at EPA Tier 3, is that still a qualifier?
Thank you, Rick, for your question. Are you referring to your baseline is tier 3 and you want to go tier 4?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that is actually something that we did receive a district comment on. So we will be adding that to table 7-2 as an eligible project type. So if you have a baseline with tier 3 and you're going tier 4, you will be eligible for funding.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And that is presuming you meet all the other guideline requirements.
Yes.
Understood.
And those are all the raised hands we have for now.
Thank you, Derek. Holmes, do we have any more on the Q&A? Holmes, do we have any more questions in the Q&A?
Yeah,
Okay.
little technical problem there. Leah Harnish asks, following up with Stacy's question, 1 year minimum in the water before compliance date. If an issue outside of the grantees control, such as the delay in the U.S. Coast Guard inspection and approval pushes this, will they be penalized? I think Mary Tess already addressed this one, but if you want to just kind of
Yes, she did. Thank you, Leah, for your question. Tess
Okay.
did address this question earlier. This is going to be something that, if something like that does come up, please reach out to us. We don't have like a straight answer for you right now, but please reach out.
All right, Stacy Callis makes a statement to tag on what Greg just said. Lead times for large tier 4 engines are currently 16 months. Thank you for that feedback. We appreciate it. Another Leah Harnish, following up on Greg's comment regarding supply chain. If a project gets a regulatory extension while they are working on a project under the Moyer program, are they able to extend their project deadline as well? Thinking specifically about scheduling extensions, which have to do with things like supply chain delays.
So thank you, Leah, for the question. Moyer does accept extensions. However, if you are in the position where you already have an approved contract, it's already executed, it's going to be up to the district if they really want to go back and amend your contract and do it, because they would have to evaluate the project all over again, not just the project life, but all the other aspects that come with evaluating a project. So I think that one, it would be really like up to the districts if they want to go back and do that. Tess, Rhonda, do you guys have anything you guys want to add to that one?
Yeah, yes.
I was going to say, the only thing I could add is that that is a question that we're working with both the reg team and like how we're going to address this question of the compliance extensions as part of the application process. So that, for example, if a district or if a potential grantee is applying in a district, sort of when does the extension need to be approved in order to like reaffirm or confirm a compliance deadline for a specific project, such that that might affect the opportunity for funding. We're looking at that question and how we can address it in the guidelines, working with the TDD staff on sort of like the timing of things. So, but thank you for the comment.
Okay, next we
Hey,
have
Holmes. Sorry about that. I guess Shirley wanted to speak and add. So Shirley, I'm going to let you speak.
I'm sorry, I don't think I did. I may have accidentally hit a button.
Okay, sorry about that.
Not a problem. Terry Wright. Terry, I might actually ask you to raise your hand if you're still in attendance. Does the regulation allow the reprogramming of funding received to repower public ferry to zero emission with new regulation? I'm not sure if you're asking about reallocating funds or exactly what that is. I see you've raised your hand. If we can unmute you so that you can maybe clarify your question for me.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'm new to the Golden Gate Bridge District, so I may not have this entirely correct, but it's my understanding that we currently have Carl Moyer funding to cover repowering. And it looks like there's the new regulations is allowing maybe, electric zero emissions that they've been broadened as it relates to electric zero emissions. And I wonder if there is opportunity to reprogram, like say we have funding that's under repower, but we see a benefit of utilize the funding in sort of a zero emissions scenario. Is reprogramming of existing funds, contemplated in these regulations?
So Terry, I would speak to your air district that actually has the contract, because that would require a contract amendment. And so again, the reevaluation of the current requirements. I just don't know enough about the local processes because they're so varied across the state about like solicitation, selection, and therefore amendment too, if there's going to be a change.
Great, thank you for clarification.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Terry.
Next, we have Kristen Joseph with a repeat question. Since there are several new vessel types being added to the grant eligibility, will additional funding be added to the program? And I think we've clearly stated there's no additional funding at this time. Rick Ialucci, referencing table 7.2, the project qualifier would be a tugboat. The table reference baseline technology of tier 2, and we desire to repower to tier 4. However, we presently operate tier 3. We already addressed that one at 2. Thank you for that. Back to Stacy. Will CARB allow stacking with VW moving forward? What about DARA? Could CARB create a funding stating fact sheet showing what can be stacked?
So we can be stacked with any other funding program, but we have to, but we still need to maintain our requirements, which is the criteria pollutant emission reductions. It's surplus relative to the regulation, but we don't have any limitations to stacking. As long as each of the individual program needs are being met, that's going to be up to them. We just know what ours are in particular.
And I'm going to add to that actually is we do know that VW is not an option because of what's was just mentioned by Tess. They do not, they are not compatible.
Yeah.
Anonymous attendee, if a project gets Moyer funding, will they still be eligible for other commercial hovercraft regulation extensions and flexibilities, particularly the 10-year extension for charter fishing?
So are you referring, this is an anonymous question, right? Is this question referring to they want to fund a tier 3 and they want to know if they get that tier 3, could they get that extension? Does someone want to speak up on whoever asked that question just to confirm that that's what they're asking? Did anyone raise their hand for that one?
Not yet. If we may, oh, here we go. It looks like it might have been Leah Harnish.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't the one to ask the question, but I'm fairly familiar with the regulation, so I think I know what they were getting at. In the regulations, that type of vessel is given a 10-year extension, just kind of like blanket extension before they need to comply. And I think the question is asking if they are applying for a project in Moyer and get it, will that preclude them from also having this extension? I'll leave that to you to answer, but if I had to guess, I'd say no.
Thank you for chiming in there, Leah, and assisting with clarifying the question. So if for a Moyer project, if you're trying to repower and there are no tier 4s available, so you're going to go tier 3, we're recognizing that tier 3 is like an alternative compliance path in situations where the tier 4 is just not available, and they will need to repower their tier 4 by their approved regulatory compliance date. So this would be, yes, you could fund the tier 3, but you would still need to go tier 4 by the approved compliance date on that extension. Tess, Rhonda, do you guys have anything you guys want to add to that?
No, I think you covered that pretty well. Is there any follow-up questions though for that one in particular? Because it does get a little confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
I
looks
guess,
like
I guess I will sort of chime in to say that, yes, we understand that there are some compliance extension options available for commercial passenger fishing vessels that sort of add complexity to that question. And part of that depends upon the timing of when it is funded. But we're happy to sort of work with the reg team to like clarify, and if we need to add criteria to make sure that it is clear, like what opportunities are available for those vessel types that have those extensions, we'll work and make sure that we account for that in some way and get some information out to folks. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a few more. Another anonymous attendee, can CARB appropriate funding to CAPCOA Rural Moyer Program with the requirement that Marine be funded? There are districts like Mendocino that have not funded Marine in years. Many folks look for funding in that area. The CAPCOA funding for rural districts also no longer funds Marine. How can this be changed, or how can CARB ensure that equal access to funds are being given to newly regulated fishing vessels and other commercial fishing vessels in this area? Lots to unpack there.
Yes. So if I am hearing the question correctly, they want to know if there's a way for Moyer at the state level to ask smaller districts in rural areas to allocate certain amount of funds to go towards Marine. Unfortunately, we cannot do that. It is still up to the district's discretion to fund whatever is, their local priorities. So unfortunately, we cannot allocate a certain amount of funds towards Marine. As much as we would love to, we cannot. But I believe that's what the question was asking. Tess, did you get something else from there, or anything else I could add?
No, I don't know. That's up to the districts in terms of reflecting local priority. And so if what I heard a little bit was the rural assistance program or the rural grants could have a solicitation that's specific to Marine. That's again up to the air districts to determine. You're right.
Yeah, and I would say also that oftentimes I think it's the RAP program that CAPCOA administers as well. Part of that might just be the availability of the funding, the amount of funding that sometimes those districts contribute. And that's also a factor in terms of just whether or not there's funding available for Marine projects. But thank you for the question.
Another anonymous, some districts do not want to take on the extra administrative burden of CBCs and amendments. Could they receive additional administrative support so that advocating on behalf of projects who need this type of attention becomes more attractive to them? Marion, I'm just going to take this one because we are here because we want to help. We are more than happy to help, and any districts that would like assistance, please feel free to reach out to us. Chen Feng Wang. Oh, not an actual question. Hi, Terry Wright. Anonymous chain, and it looks like we're down to Peter Schrappen. Have you listed out how much money is available for ferries, fishing vessels, towing vessels, etc.? What does the pie graph look like? Peter, we've already addressed this a few different times in a few different ways. So I think that actually resolves all of our written questions at this time.
Thank you, Holmes. All right, Derek, did anyone raise their hand since,
No raised hands at the moment.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions for us? Tess, Rhonda, do we want to give it a little bit of additional time to see if anyone has any extra questions, or do we just want to move it along a little?
We want to put up the slide with your email.
Yes. All right, next slide, please, Derek. Okay. So do we want to give a little bit more time to see if we have any more questions, or can we do closing remarks?
I think you could start with closing remarks and then open it up again for questions, just because we have the time for it. So
okay, sounds good. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. I do want to give you guys the option if you guys want to meet with us offline because you guys have other questions, and this is for stakeholders and districts. Please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information as well as Rhonda's is on this slide. Again, we want to hear your comments. We want to get feedback on this chapter. We want to hear what you guys are looking for or need. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you everyone for being here and taking the time and interest to actually listen to our presentation, ask really good questions. And I want to thank all the CARB and district staff that have helped along the way with getting the chapter to where it's at right now. And before I forget, Ray Carpenter, if you're still on and you could put your contact information in the chat so that Holmes can get that to me, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, those closing statements, is that the comment period is open until August 12th, I believe. So
Yes.
like, once again, if folks take a look at the draft chapter, if you have specific comments or any information that you'd like to share, that would be very helpful. And then that way we can make sure that your questions and concerns are addressed. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Anyone have any follow-up they'd like to?
We actually do have one question that just came in. Does CARB have a list of grant writers?
No,
No, we don't.
we don't. Well, I don't believe so, but I don't believe so. We don't usually do that.
Thank you, Tess. Was there any more questions, Holmes?
Any other raised hands by chance? Just double check that one too.
No
Neither
raised
of-
hands at the moment.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, everybody. I think that's it. I think that you've got the contact information for Miriam. Please reach out, Miriam and Rhonda, if there's any questions that you have or comments related to the proposed chapter update. That would be good. Thank you.
Thank you. And this presentation was recorded, so it'll be posted as soon as possible for you guys to review. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.